My wife told me to choose her or my mom. Then I found out she stole our money, contacted my estranged father, and had been planning her escape for months. And 2 nights ago, my wife Clara sat me down, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "You need to choose. It's either me or your mother." At first, I thought I misheard her. I was lying on the couch, halfway through a video on my phone, completely caught off guard. I let out an awkward laugh, expecting her to smirk, to give some kind of sign that this was just an exaggeration, maybe a joke taken too far. But her face stayed stone cold. "Choose," she repeated, her voice firm, controlled. "I can't live like this anymore." It wasn't a fight. There was no yelling, no tears, no dramatic accusations, just a quiet, terrifying certainty in her voice. That made it so much worse. I stared at her, my brain scrambling to make sense of what she was saying. "Clara, what are you talking about?" Her arms crossed, and she exhaled sharply, like she'd been holding this in for too long. "Your mother is always in our marriage. She's always hovering. I've had enough." That was when I realized this wasn't just some heat-of-the-moment frustration. She meant it. "Let me back up for a second, because I know what people are going to ask. What's the deal with my mom? Is she really that bad?" "No, she's not. My mom, Margaret, is a good person. She's warm, supportive, maybe a little over-involved sometimes, but never in a toxic way. She raised me alone after my dad disappeared when I was a kid. It was just the two of us for most of my life. So yeah, we're close. But not in some weird, unhealthy way. Just the natural kind of bond you'd expect from a mother and son who only had each other for years. Clara has never liked her. I used to chalk it up to typical in-law tension, the kind of small conflicts you always hear about. I knew there were passive-aggressive comments from both sides, but nothing outright vicious. My wife would complain that my mom was too involved, but I never saw it. For example, my mom has this habit of cooking meals and dropping them off unannounced. It's her way of showing love. One time, Clara told me she felt disrespected by it, like my mom thought she couldn't take care of me. I thought she was overreacting, but I let it go. But now, sitting across from her while she packed a bag, I realized it had escalated into something else entirely. "You're making me choose between my wife and my mom?" I finally asked, still unable to believe what I was hearing. "That's not fair." Clara's expression didn't change. "What's not fair is that I've put up with this for years. Your mom is a third person in this marriage." I ran a hand down my face, trying to stay calm. "What does that even mean? What exactly has she done?" Clara listed the same vague complaints she's always had. "She's always around. She lives across town and visits maybe twice a month," I countered. "She undermines me." I frowned. "How?" "She doesn't respect boundaries." That one made me pause. I asked her, "What boundaries?" Clara's voice went up. "She shows up unannounced. She calls you every single day. You never tell her no, even when I ask you to." I blinked. That's what this was about. I thought this was normal. Moms call their kids. Moms check in. That's just how things are. I never thought it was a problem, and maybe that's where I screwed up. I didn't see that Clara viewed this as something bigger, something more suffocating than I ever realized. "I don't think this is worth blowing up our marriage over," I told her, trying to de-escalate. "If you feel like my mom is crossing lines, we can talk about it. We can go to therapy, figure out some boundaries together." She shook her head, eyes cold. "No, I'm done talking. I need to know that I come first. I'm your wife." Then she zipped up her duffel bag and walked toward the door. I shot to my feet. "Where are you going?" "To Nicole's," she said flatly. I followed her, panic creeping in. "Clara, slow down. This isn't something I can just decide overnight. You're asking me to cut someone out of my life." She reached for the door handle. "I hope you enjoy being a mama's boy forever." Then she walked out and slammed the door behind her. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had just been. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind running in circles. Was I wrong? Was my mom actually overstepping? Had I been blind to something this entire time? I replayed every single interaction Clara and my mom had, searching for moments I might have dismissed too quickly. But the truth is, my mom has never been cruel to Clara. Not once. She's always been polite, even when Clara was cold. So why the ultimatum? Why now? The next morning, I sent Clara a text. "We need to talk. I can't make this decision overnight." I expected a fight, maybe an argument, or at least some back-and-forth messages. Instead, she sent me one text back. When you're ready to choose, let me know. That was it. No, I love you. No, let's work on this. Just an ultimatum, as if our entire marriage boiled down to a single decision. And now, I'm sitting here, staring at my phone, wondering what the hell I'm supposed to do. I love my wife. I married her because I wanted a future with her. But I can't just cut my mom out of my life for no reason. It feels like I'm being punished for something I don't understand. And the worst part? I'm not even sure if I want to fight for this marriage anymore. Because what kind of person walks out over something like this? What kind of person forces someone to choose, like it's some kind of game? I haven't told my mom about it yet. I feel too embarrassed, because how do I even say it? Hey, Mom, my wife thinks you're the devil and is making me pick between you two. But at the same time, I keep wondering, if I cave now, what's next? Will I have to keep proving I put Clara first over and over again? Will there always be a new demand, a new sacrifice? Is this the hill my marriage is going to die on? And deep down, I can't shake the feeling that this was never really about my mom. That maybe Clara just wanted an excuse to leave. It's been a few days since Clara walked out, and I've been stuck in this weird fog, like nothing around me makes sense anymore. I've gone through every possible scenario in my head, trying to figure out what went wrong, but I keep circling back to the same question. Why now? For years, Clara has complained about my mom, but it was always in small ways. Passive-aggressive comments, a sigh when my mom called, little remarks about how she felt like my mother was always hovering. But this? An ultimatum? It felt like it came out of nowhere. I tried to keep myself busy with work, but every time my mind wandered, it led me straight back to that night. The way Clara packed her bag like she had already made up her mind. The way she walked out without hesitation. It didn't feel like someone making a desperate plea for change. It felt planned. Then yesterday morning, I got my first real clue. I was sitting at my desk when my phone buzzed with a message from my sister, Sophie. You need to see this. I clicked the attachment, and my stomach dropped. Screenshots. Dozens of them. Sophie is friends with one of Clara's old co-workers, someone I barely know and have never even met in person. Somehow, this person stumbled across a private group chat where Clara had been venting about me. I scrolled through the messages, feeling like I was looking into a world I was never supposed to see. He's such a spineless mama's boy. It's disgusting. I can't take this anymore. She's controlling him, and he's too stupid to see it. If he doesn't cut her off, I'll leave. I don't care. I read that last one at least 5 times, my vision blurring. If he doesn't cut her off, I'll leave. So this wasn't a sudden outburst of frustration. This wasn't a moment of desperation. She had been planning to do this. I sat there, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. Clara had been trashing me for weeks, maybe longer, acting like I was some pathetic idiot who needed to be saved from his own mother. But the worst part wasn't even what she said. The worst part was that she had already made her decision. This wasn't about talking things through. It wasn't about therapy or boundaries. She had already decided that if I didn't give her what she wanted, she was gone. And she left. I showed Sophie the messages, and even she was floored. She's been planning to leave, Sophie said. She's just looking for a reason. That's when it hit me. This was never about my mom. Not really. Clara didn't suddenly snap because of some invisible boundary being crossed. She had been waiting for the right moment, the right excuse, to make me the bad guy in all of this. And I had been too clueless to see it. I needed answers. I texted Clara. We need to talk. She ignored me all day. By nighttime, I couldn't sit still anymore. My mind was racing, trying to piece everything together. What was she hiding? What else had she been saying behind my back? I opened our shared bank account to see if she had been spending money since she left. And that's when I found it. A $15,000 withdrawal. She pulled the money out 2 days before she gave me the ultimatum. I just sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was going on? I wanted to believe there was some logical explanation, but let's be real. People don't just pull 15 grand out of savings for no reason. That's not rent money. That's not groceries. That's an escape plan. And suddenly, it all made sense. She had already decided to leave. The ultimatum was never about fixing our marriage. It was a test, one she expected me to fail. She wanted a clean exit, a reason to walk away without looking like the villain. But she didn't expect me to check the bank account. She didn't expect me to put the pieces together. I didn't sleep again that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like my entire life had been a lie. The next morning, I called her. She picked up on the 3rd try, her voice cold and detached. What do you want? You took $15,000 out of our savings, I said. Why? Her response sent chills down my spine. Because I needed it. No hesitation. No guilt. For what? I demanded. You left without telling me anything, and now I find out you're taking our money? She sighed, like I was exhausting her. I can't deal with you and your mom anymore. I needed a break, and I needed some money to sort myself out. But 15 grand. I shot back. You don't just walk out and empty our account without telling me. That's insane. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. Instead, she doubled down. If you'd just grown a spine and put me first, we wouldn't be here. You and your mom created this mess, not me. I swear to God, I almost threw my phone. Her words felt like gaslighting. Like she was trying to convince me this was all my fault, that I had pushed her into doing this. After we hung up, I sat in silence, my thoughts a hurricane of confusion and anger. Then I did something I had been avoiding. I called my mom. She answered cheerfully, completely unaware of what was happening. Hey, sweetie, how's everything? And suddenly, I felt this overwhelming wave of guilt. How do you even start that conversation? How do you tell your mother that your wife thinks she's the villain in your marriage? That she left because of her? But I had to say something. Mom, did something happen between you and Clara? Recently. She paused, clearly confused. No, I don't think so. What? So I told her. Everything. The ultimatum. The money. The messages I had seen. I expected her to get defensive, maybe even angry. But instead, she just sounded hurt. I never wanted to come between you two, she said softly. I don't understand where this is coming from. I've always tried to stay out of your marriage. And that was the truth. My mom had always been careful about not overstepping. If anything, she had been overly cautious, worried about being seen as an intrusive mother-in-law. But then she hesitated. You know, she said, her voice quieter. Clara asked me about money once. My breath caught. What? A while back. She was asking about my will. I felt my stomach drop. She wanted to know if I had plans to leave you anything, and if I'd ever consider helping you two out financially. It was strange, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Clara had been asking my mom about her finances, behind my back. The puzzle pieces started clicking together. She gave me an ultimatum about my mom. She pulled $15,000 out of our account. She had been venting to her friends about how I was too stupid to see what's going on. And now, I find out she was prying into my mother's will. This wasn't about boundaries. This wasn't about my mom being controlling. This was about money. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of everything. The ultimatum, the money, the group chat, and now this. Clara had been asking my mom about her will. It felt like someone had pulled the floor out from under me. I always thought I knew my wife. Sure, we had our issues, but I believed in her. I believed in us. Now, I was realizing that I had spent years loving someone who had been hiding parts of herself from me. And the worst part? I still didn't know the full story. I needed answers. I texted Clara again. We need to talk. In person. No response. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for her to decide when I was worth a conversation. So I got in my car and drove straight to her sister Nicole's house. When I pulled up, I spotted Clara's car in the driveway. Good. I knocked on the door, heart pounding. Nicole answered, her eyes widening when she saw me. Nathan, she said, crossing her arms. What are you doing here? I need to talk to Clara. Nicole hesitated. She doesn't want to see you right now. I clenched my jaw. Too bad. Before she could stop me, I stepped past her into the house. Clara was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. When she looked up and saw me, she sighed like I was an inconvenience. You can't just show up here, she said flatly. I ignored that. You've been asking my mom about her will? Her expression barely changed, just a flicker of something, annoyance? Guilt? But it was gone in an instant. I was curious, she said, shrugging. I stared at her. Curious? You went behind my back and asked my mother about her money. That's not curiosity, Clara. That's manipulation. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You're acting like I stole something. I felt my hands tighten into fists at my sides. You took 15 grand out of our savings. That hit a nerve. Her jaw clenched. I told you I needed it. For what? I demanded. What the hell are you planning, Clara? You don't just leave your husband, take our money, and refuse to talk about it unless you're hiding something. She exhaled sharply and stood up, arms crossed. I don't have to explain myself to you. I let out a humorless laugh. Actually, you do? We're married. That was our money. And you owe me an explanation. She shook her head, looking at me like I was pathetic. You just don't get it, do you? You've never gotten it. Then explain it to me. I snapped. Silence. Then she said, you'll never put me first as long as your mother is around. I thought if I could get you to see how toxic she is, you'd finally wake up. I stared at her in disbelief. So what? You thought you could force me to cut her off by giving me an ultimatum? Her eyes were cold. I did what I had to do. I took a step back. Jesus Christ. Do you even hear yourself? She didn't even flinch. You're too blind to see what's right in front of you. Your mother controls you. No, Clara. You tried to control me. And when it didn't work, you left. For the first time, she looked slightly unsure of herself. Like she hadn't expected me to push back. Like she thought I'd still be scrambling to fix things, to chase her. But I wasn't chasing her anymore. You wanted me to choose? I said, voice steady. Fine. I choose myself. Her eyes widened slightly. What does that mean? It means we're done, I said. I'll have the divorce papers ready this week. For the first time since this started, she actually looked surprised. Like she hadn't truly considered the possibility that I'd walk away. I didn't give her a chance to respond. I turned and walked out the door. I expected to feel broken, to feel like my world was shattering. But instead, I felt something else entirely. Relief. I got in my car and drove home, my mind clearer than it had been in days. But as I pulled into my driveway, my phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. You're not gonna believe this. Call me ASAP. I sighed and dialed her number. What now? Sophie's voice was sharp. Clara has been talking to Dad. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. What? She reached out to him months ago? Behind your back. I felt a cold, sinking feeling in my gut. How do you know this? His wife messaged me on Facebook, Sophie said. She thought it was weird and wanted to know if everything was okay. I swallowed hard. What did she say? She said Clara has been asking about our family's finances. Specifically, if Dad ever left anything behind for us. My stomach twisted into a knot. She was looking for money, I muttered. Sophie was quiet for a second. Yeah, and she was willing to go through him to find it. I hung up without another word. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding. This wasn't just manipulation. This was calculated. She had been planning her exit for months, searching for a payday that didn't even exist. I had spent years loving someone I never truly knew. And now I was done. As I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, the weight of everything pressing down on me, I heard a sharp knock on the window. I jumped, my heart slamming into my ribs. It was late, too late for visitors, and I hadn't been expecting anyone. When I turned my head, my stomach dropped. Clara. She was standing outside my car, arms crossed, her face shadowed by the dim streetlight. She looked calm, too calm, and that put me on edge. I rolled down the window just enough to hear her. We need to talk. I exhaled sharply, gripping the door handle. There's nothing left to say. She smirked. You sure about that? I hesitated. Something about her tone sent a prickle of unease down my spine. Then, before I could react, she reached for the door handle and yanked. It was locked. I saw frustration flash across her face before she leaned in, her eyes cold and calculating. You think you're so smart, don't you? Just walking away like that. I clenched my jaw. Go home, Clara. She didn't move. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She tapped it against the window. I was going to keep this between us, but since you're so eager to be done with me, she trailed off, letting the implication hang. I didn't trust her for a second, but curiosity won. Slowly, I unlocked the door and stepped out, keeping distance between us. What is this? She shoved the folder into my chest. Read it. I glanced down, flipping it open, and then my blood ran cold. Inside were bank statements, my bank statements. She had been tracking my finances, my investments, things I had never shared with her. How the hell did you get this? I growled. She tilted her head, a slow smile creeping onto her lips. I told you, Nathan. You were never as in control as you thought. I snapped the folder shut, my pulse hammering. You broke into my account. She shrugged. It's called being prepared. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. If you even think about touching my money, I'll make sure you regret it. Her smile didn't fade. We'll see. Then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she turned on her heel and walked away, disappearing into the night. I stood there, gripping the folder, every nerve in my body screaming. this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I sat in my car for a long time after Sophie's call, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My wife, no, Clara, had been reaching out to my father, a man I hadn't spoken to in over 20 years. She had tracked him down, contacted his wife, and had been digging into my family's finances behind my back. Why? I already knew the answer. It wasn't about my mom. It had never been about my mom. Clara had built up some fantasy in her head where my family had money stashed away, and she was trying to figure out how to get her hands on it. When my mother didn't offer her anything, she turned to my estranged father. She wanted security, but not in the way a normal wife does. This wasn't about building a life together, about us as a team. She had been making plans for herself, plans that didn't include me, and I had been blind to it the whole time. I finally forced myself out of the car, walked into my apartment, and locked the door behind me. The silence inside felt heavier than before. It was over. I knew that now, but it didn't feel like a breakup. It felt like I had been scammed. I went straight to my laptop and pulled up the bank statements again. I wanted to see exactly when she had started pulling money out. The first withdrawal was small, just a couple hundred here and there. But then, 2 days before she gave me the ultimatum, she took $15,000. A few minutes later, Sophie texted me. "What are you going to do?" I didn't even hesitate. "File for divorce." She responded almost immediately. "Good. Don't give her another chance to screw you over." I spent the rest of the night going through everything, old messages, emails, financial records, trying to see if there was anything else I had missed. I kept waiting for the heartbreak to hit, for the grief of losing my marriage to finally sink in, but it never did. Because now I saw it clearly. I wasn't losing my wife. I was losing someone who had been playing a long game and got caught before she could cash out. The next day, I went to a lawyer. I walked into the office, sat down, and laid it all out. The money, the messages, the way she had walked out with no warning. The lawyer listened, nodding along, and when I finished, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "She took that money before she left?" he asked. I nodded. He shook his head. "That's going to work against her, especially if she tries to come after you for anything else." "Can I get it back?" I asked. "Legally, probably not all of it, but we can make sure she doesn't take another dime." That was enough for me. I signed the paperwork right then and there. When I got back to my apartment, I saw a missed call from Clara, the first one since she left. I stared at it for a long moment before she sent a text. "We need to talk." I let out a bitter laugh. Of course, now she wanted to talk. I didn't respond right away. I let her sit with the silence for a while. Then, finally, I texted back. "I'll bring the divorce papers." Not even a minute later, she called again. This time, I answered. "What the hell, Nathan?" she snapped the second I picked up. "You're filing for divorce?" "You gave me an ultimatum," I said calmly. "You made your choice." She scoffed. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I clenched my jaw. "Yeah? Well, you shouldn't have taken 15 grand if you didn't want it to." There was silence on the other end. Finally, she sighed. "Can we just meet in person? Please." I considered saying no. I didn't know her anything, but a part of me still wanted to look her in the eye and hear her admit to everything. "Fine," I said. One last conversation. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop the next morning. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting at a table by the window, looking effortlessly put together like she hadn't just torched our marriage. She gave me a small, tight smile. "Hey." I sat down across from her and slid the divorce papers onto the table. "Sign them." Her eyes flicked to the papers, then back to me. "Nathan, come on. You don't really want to do this." I let out a hollow laugh. "You stole from me. You lied to me. You tried to manipulate me into cutting off my mother, and when that didn't work, you walked out. You made it pretty damn easy to want this." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. I was looking out for myself. "Yeah," I said bitterly. "I figured that out." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." She exhaled sharply. "I wanted security, Nathan. I wanted to know that if something happened, we'd be okay. But I could never count on you to make the right decisions because you let your mother run your life." I clenched my fists under the table. "So you thought stealing from me and trying to cut my mom out of my life was the solution?" She didn't even flinch. "I did what I had to do." I shook my head, disgusted. "No, you did what was best for you. And when you realized my mom wasn't handing you money, you started looking for it somewhere else. That's why you went to my dad, isn't it?" That got a reaction. Her eyes widened just slightly, just enough for me to know I was right. I don't know what you're talking about, she said too quickly. I leaned forward. I know you contacted him. I know you asked about family money. What the hell were you hoping to find, Clara? She didn't answer. I scoffed. Yeah, that's what I thought. For the first time, she looked uncomfortable. Nathan, I didn't mean for it to end like this. I watched her carefully. There was no real emotion in her voice. No regret. Just disappointment that she had lost. I did, I said, pushing the divorce papers toward her again. Sign them. She hesitated, but she knew she had no leverage left. With a sigh, she picked up the pen and signed. When she was done, she looked up at me, something bitter in her expression. You're going to regret this. I stood up. No, I think, for the first time in years, I'm making the right choice. I walked out without looking back. A few days after Clara signed the divorce papers, I thought that would be the end of it. I figured she would take the money she stole and disappear, maybe spin some sob story to her friends about how I had abandoned her. I was ready to move on, to finally start rebuilding my life without the constant weight of her manipulation pressing down on me. But I underestimated just how deep this rabbit hole went. It started with a phone call from Sophie. You're not going to believe this, she said the second I answered. I sighed, already exhausted. I feel like I've heard that too many times this week. No, seriously. Clara isn't done. I pinched the bridge of my nose. What now? Sophie hesitated for a second, like she didn't even know how to say it. She's trying to get the money back. I froze. What? She's saying you forced her to sign the divorce papers, and that she deserves more. She's talking to a lawyer. My blood ran cold. I had just started breathing again, just started feeling like I could move past all of this, and now she was trying to come after me for more. She stole from me. I snapped. She took 15 grand out of our account before she even left. I know, Sophie said. But you know how these things go. If she gets a lawyer who's willing to play dirty, she might try to spin this like she's the victim. The worst part? I could see Clara doing exactly that. She wasn't done taking from me. She had already taken my trust, my stability, my peace of mind. Now she wanted to see if she could squeeze me for more before finally walking away for good. I wasn't going to let that happen. I called my lawyer the next morning and told him everything. He listened carefully, then reassured me. She doesn't have a case, he said. She voluntarily signed the divorce papers. She took money before she left. If anything, she's the one who should be worried. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. Because I knew Clara. She wouldn't just back down quietly. And I was right. A few days later, I got a message from a mutual friend. Clara had been posting all over social media about escaping a toxic marriage. She was painting herself as a victim, making vague accusations about how I had emotionally neglected her, how she had been forced to make hard decisions. I scrolled through her posts, my jaw clenching with each one. She never mentioned my name, but she didn't have to. Anyone who knew us would immediately know who she was talking about. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that she started a GoFundMe. I stared at the screen in disbelief. She was asking for money. Starting over is hard, she wrote. I was in a difficult situation for years, and now I'm trying to rebuild my life. Any help is appreciated. Red heart. She was asking people to donate to her because she couldn't squeeze any more money out of me. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw my phone across the room. She's actually insane, Sophie texted when I sent her the link. She's desperate, I replied. And it showed. The comments under her post weren't exactly what she had probably been expecting. Didn't you literally take thousands from your ex before leaving? This is a scam. Maybe sell the engagement ring first, girl. People weren't buying it. And then, out of nowhere, my mom called. Honey, she said carefully. Clara showed up at my house. I nearly dropped my phone. What? She knocked on my door, looking all sad, saying she wanted to talk. My hands curled into fists. Did you let her in? Of course not, my mom said, scoffing. I told her I had nothing to say to her and shut the door. I exhaled sharply. Jesus Christ. I can't believe she has the nerve. She's not done with you yet, my mom said. Be careful. I didn't need to be told twice. That night, I changed the locks to my apartment. I started looking into security cameras. Because if Clara was willing to show up at my mom's house unannounced, who's to say she wouldn't try something even worse? A few more days passed. The GoFundMe flopped. People called her out, and she quietly took it down. She stopped posting dramatic updates. And then, finally, she disappeared. No more texts. No more surprise visits. Just silence. I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for another blow, another twist, another insane scheme. But nothing came. It was like she had finally accepted defeat. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe.